The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to Useful Social Media's webinar on social media impact measurement. Over the next 15 minutes we'll be discussing how you generate a clear and transparent means of assessing your social efforts, as well as actionable performance insight which will drive your future social strategy. My name is Jack Edgar and I will be hosting today's webinar. And the webinar forms part of the agenda for the 4th Annual Corporate Social Media Summit taking place in San Francisco on September the 15th and 16th. Both Jennifer and Lutz will be speaking there alongside 30 senior executives from the world's most social brands. And they'll be addressing this year's biggest topics in the social space, from social media integration and collaboration, advanced social customer support, enhancing customer engagement through valuable and timely content generation, and many other crucial topics in the corporate social space. Now, before we get started with the discussion, I just want to remind you that we are recording this webinar, so everyone will receive the audio recordings next week. The webinar is also very much interactive, so we have several polls taking place throughout the discussion, so please do vote and get involved. I also urge you to type in your own questions in the question box on the left-hand side, so we can ensure the debate and insight is as relevant to you as possible, and I'll aim to get through as many of your questions as I can. We'll also be using the hashtag CSMSF, which you can see at the bottom of the slide. So any additional thoughts and general feelings, please feel free just to tweet away. Now, we have two fantastic speakers who will be sharing their insight today. Firstly, Lutz Finger, who is the Director of Data Science and Data Engineering at LinkedIn, and is also the author of Ask, Measure, Learn. We also have Jennifer Lashua, who's the Editor-in-Chief over at Intel. Welcome to you both. So it'd be great to kickstart the webinar with our first poll. And you can only select one answer, and I'll give you around 15 seconds to do so. So please do get involved, and please do vote away. And that first question is, to what extent do you feel your company has a clear and consistent system of measuring the impact of your social media efforts? To what extent do you feel that your company has a clear and consistent system of measuring the impact of your social efforts? So please do vote away. We have option 1, very much so. Option 2, to some extent. 3, improvement required. And D, significant improvement required. So it's just wondering to what extent you have a clear and consistent system of measuring the impact of your social media efforts currently. We have a lot of votes coming in, so anyone who hasn't voted, it would be fantastic to do so now. Fantastic. And we should be having those results up on your screen right about now. And as we can see, there is a kind of mixture across the board, but certainly the biggest chunk, shall we say, is definitely improvement required and significant improvement required. Now, before we move on to our questions, I'd love to bring the speakers in at this point. So let's, firstly, does this surprise you? The fact that the majority of our listeners actually require either significant improvement or at least some improvement?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. It's the nature of the beast. We have no social media around for more than 10 years. However, with all that social media involvement, new metrics come up all day long. Kind of like we start with counts, we go over to sentiment, we go to engagement, we mix them all three together, and at the end, it becomes very, very difficult to steer any content engagement to it because you don't really know what to measure.
Fantastic. And on your side, Jen, I mean, ultimately, what does accurate and insightful social media impact measurement mean to you? And really, why should companies be looking to achieve this?
Yeah, I think it's not surprising that there's a lot of members who are feeling that they would like to see improvement in their social media measurement. I think that's actually a very positive sign that there is so much interest from the industry in creating metrics and analytics that are actionable. So I think it's actually a great sign that there is so much focus on it. I think in terms of accurate and insightful social media measurement, to me that means measuring the things that are really key to your brand and what you as a company or an organization are trying to accomplish. There's lots of different ways that you can measure social media and social impact, and I think it really depends upon whether or not you're trying to achieve awareness or engagement or clicks or conversions, and those are all measured very differently.
Fantastic. And on your side, really, I mean, I know you touched upon it briefly, but really, how would you go about describing that accurate and insightful social media impact measurement? And really, what is the impetus for companies to get this right?
Okay, well, let's start with the accurate. Most likely, there is no accuracy. There is only consistency, meaning the measures you guys have in any setting is always wrong, but as long as it's consistently wrong, I can use it for benchmark and can see how I'm trending and so on. So it's very, very rare that you actually get a very accurate measure. So that's the first thing. And the other one, I completely agree with Jennifer. If it's insightful, the very question means insightful for what? So take the marketing range. Social media often gets used in combination with marketing or PR or brand, or like there are lots of things. Let's take marketing. Now already in marketing you have different aims, and if you have like different aims what you want to achieve. Do you want to achieve awareness? Well, then you're probably trying to come up with social media strategies which create reach, creates repetition, and so on. Or do you trying to create intention? Well, then you probably take up more social signals from social media in order to create intention. That is, so the very word insightful starts, and like you need to start with the ask, with the question first.
And as you say, it's hugely important for that clarity at the earliest stage possible. And really, I mean, that could be an example of one of the key challenges. I mean, Jen, going to you, I mean, could you highlight and explain perhaps your biggest challenge when trying to generate this clear performance measurement regarding your social strategy?
Our biggest challenge used to be cross-organizational education on social media metrics, since this had been a relatively new field just a couple of years ago, and some executives weren't quite as familiar with social measurement as they were with, for example, website analytics that had been around for decades. But we have spent a fair amount of time and effort conducting regular and consistent measurement and evangelism internally. And we're now at the point where this is actually widely understood. So now the challenge for us today is the constantly changing landscape of social. The metrics we use today aren't the same as what we measured a year ago. And furthermore, the tools that we're using for measurement and the APIs and the way that we're collecting data are constantly changing. So the challenge now has shifted to being consistent in our measurement, yet agile so that we can quickly accommodate these changes.
Certainly, as you say, I mean, trying to keep your finger on the pulse, but at the same time, you know, ensuring that you're not jumping around constantly as well. And really, let's on your side, I mean, in your experience, what have you seen as one of the biggest challenges when trying to generate this clear measurement?
Yeah, I think the industry goes through cycle. You know, something new comes up, so we suddenly have this new way to communicate, which is a certain way of, like you have earned media, you have owned media, and there is a good bit of evangelism, as Jennifer pointed out, needed in order to first enable an organization to change. And you can actually see this very well in the company I built up before I joined LinkedIn. We very often interacted with those first movers in a company. So the people who first ventured into social media, who very often did this without agreement of their bosses. So this is this kind of like notion of explaining people, okay, there is something out there. Now, the world has pretty much matured in that setting. So today it's the biggest challenge is actually very often, why are we doing this? There was a study done by IBM, and they kind of went out and they asked people of Facebook pages. So they asked company, what do you expect your friends or your followers or your customers, why should they like your Facebook company page? And they did the same thing to the consumers. They went out and said, so why would you ever follow a company Facebook page? And if you do a ranking of the reasons people give, well, consumers have reason number one is, well, I want to get informed of discounts. I want to get something cheaper. That's the reason why I'm coming. And somewhere low to the bottom or at the end of their list was, I would like to know something about new products. Well, on the company side, guess what the manager thought why the consumers go? Well, they want to learn about our new great product features. That was what they thought as reason number one. And the last reason they would attribute was they want to get discounts. And that is kind of an expectation gap. And with that expectation gap comes the challenge of what do you actually want to measure to get any of those? Is it a discount or is it new features learning? Any of those things right, you need different measurements. So at the moment, the biggest challenge is to become clear as an organization, why are we doing this investment and how do we best monitor so that we get the monetization we want.
And as you say, really having that clarity on what you want to achieve is that first step. And bearing that in mind, what would you say is the best next step to take when trying to generate this clarity regarding your performance insight? Sorry, Lutz, going back to you.
Okay, absolutely. So, by the way, it sounds very easy to say you need clarity. it's very much in the weeds. And this is to the audience. Guys, if you're in the audience kind of wondering, kind of think, damn, we don't have this clarity, you're not alone, believe me. I've talked to many boards, and there are an abundance of things you want to do with social media. Half of them are possible. But like first thing is figure it out what one of the few things you want to do. And it's not an easy process. Once you do know, well, the next question, like, so once you do know the ask, well, once you have defined the thing you're looking for, the next thing to look for is what are the best measures describing this? And as like Jennifer pointed, it's like if I'm talking branding or if we're talking, then this is one metrics. If I'm talking something by trying to predict upcoming things in PR, for example, what's coming up, what's the next negative wave I could be hit for, would be another thing. If I'm trying to control in my sales channel and trying to figure out like how to get people into my sales channel, then this again becomes another metric. So there are, once you understand what you want to do, which is very company specific, then you need to figure out what is the best metrics I'm having to control or to predict. And there are loads of different variations of how to do this. But one thing is clear, all of those metrics, because we're talking social media, because we're talking unstructured data, is most likely wrong, but it doesn't make a big difference as long as it's consistent wrong.
Mm. And on your side, Jen, I mean, you mentioned that key challenge that you experienced, you know, when you first set out on this journey. I mean, what was the first big step that you took with regards to generating clear performance insight? You know, what would your words of wisdom be?
Yep, I think just really building on what Lutz had just mentioned, which was thinking about what's important to your brand and especially what your management cares about. Different companies, obviously, whether they're a B2B or a B2C or a direct-to-consumer, they have different end business goals in mind. So what are really the hot buttons for your management? And then my recommendation would be to create a clear and replicable template with a small number of data points. Executive management doesn't need to see all the data. They want to see a very small number of data points. And more importantly, they want to understand your analysis and the key takeaways from that data. So I would create that template and then use that template regularly with your executive management so they become really accustomed to the format and they can see data and analytics building on itself month over month, quarter over quarter. I would also look at really clarifying, and to Lutz's point as well, I agree, it's easier said than done, but trying to become really clear about what it is that you're trying to do. So if you're seeking awareness, you want to reach a large number of people with your message, so you want to be measuring maybe impressions or share of voice. If you're seeking engagement, you're measuring things like retweets and favorites and shares. If you're seeking click-throughs, you might be measuring link clicks. We also measure what happens when someone lands on the destination of that link. So did we bring them to the right place? Did we prepare them appropriately for where we're landing them? Are they staying on that destination? How long? What else do they click when they get there? If you're seeking conversions, you may or may not actually need link clicks. New types of media, new types of Twitter cards, for example, can enable app downloads and lead captures and even e-commerce now right directly from within your Twitter stream, so you never actually need to leave that. So I would just really kind of think about, and this can vary campaign by campaign as well, what it is that you're trying to do and what you're trying to measure, and then create that clear and consistent framework that you're using with your management on a regular basis.
Fantastic, Jen. And we've got a lot of questions coming through on both on Twitter on the question box, which is fantastic. And what a lot of people are asking is actually with regards, if I go back to you, Jen, with regard to how you actually go about tracking ROI and your social media efforts. I mean, what metrics and KPIs do you use, and how do you ensure that there is this consistency across the company?
The way that we ensure the consistency is by using this template. We have a couple of different templates. We have one which we create monthly. We have another which is quarterly. We have a couple that are quarterly. And then there is kind of the ongoing constant data and analytics that goes on really within and amongst the team. But the bigger report outs that go to the executive management are monthly and quarterly. The monthly analytics are really focused around the size of the communities that we are looking to grow. So are we growing fans and followers? We look at engagement, so how engaged our fan and follower bases are with our content and whether those numbers are growing. And then we look at content performance. So we're really interested in the top types of content that are performing on a monthly basis, and we look at that differently for the paid versus the organic posts and tweets, for example, since those are significantly different. On the quarterly analytics, we are looking, there's two different types of analyses that we do on a quarterly basis. One of those is really focused around kind of some of those similar metrics that I just explained, which were impressions, kind of impression volume, share of voice, and engagement levels. And then there's a whole other set of analytics that we do quarterly that my team finds extremely valuable because it's really focused around the content. And those analytics are telling us things like, are pictures working better than handcrafted images? Are 15-second video clips working better than 60-second clips? Is it better for us to post or tweet on a Monday or a Tuesday, and at what time of day, and what different topics and what different themes are resonating better? So it's really getting down to the details of the content. And that really helps to inform our content development cycle for the next time around.
Fantastic. And we're actually going to, I mean, again, we've got some great questions coming in on the question, and it actually leads on nicely to our second poll. So again, please do get involved and please do vote. And our second question should be coming up on your screen now, and that is, do you feel that your company has a culture that fully embraces social and can also clearly define its values? So it's a simple yes, no answer to this one. I understand there's probably a bit of a grey area there, but we're trying to make you fall down on one side of the fence if you can. Do you feel that your company has, firstly, a culture that embraces social but can also clearly define its value? We have people voting in now, which is fantastic. I'll just give you another 5 more seconds to vote. 3, 2, 1. Fantastic. Thank you to those who voted again, and you should be able to see those results coming up on your result now. Fantastic. And as you can see, it's relatively equal. I mean, of course, we have no coming in as the winner at 60%. So obviously, then it seems to be a lot of our listeners who do feel that they have a company culture which does indeed embrace social. However, there are a significant amount which perhaps don't. And Jen, going back to you, in fact, you know, what kind of metrics do you feel can help evangelize the role of social media internally? You know, perhaps to win over such stakeholders who have concerns perhaps about its true value.
I think the key here is that you have to measure social media performance versus your company's bottom line goals. You have to make the association between the two. So whatever it takes for your company to measure what is truly important towards achieving those bottom line goals, whether it is sales or whether it is brand or whether it is just sheer volume of conversation or whatever it is that's really important to your company, you have to tie those social analytics to those bottom line goals. Once you do that, you can kind of set up that dashboard or that template that I mentioned. And I saw some folks asking on Twitter if I could share some examples of what the templates are that we use. And of course, that's pretty confidential data, but let me see if there's a way that I can de-confidentialize that, and then we can see if that's something that I can tweet out. But yeah, I think setting up that clear and repeatable format is something that would be useful, and especially when you tie it to your company's bottom line goals.
And on your side, Lutz, in your experience, I mean, are there particular metrics which you feel have specifically helped get that buy-in at the highest level and really help generate this culture which does embrace social?
Well, like if you talk top level, and in the best way to actually embrace social is use traditional, meaning if you show that information, like people discussing certain topic, and it makes it up to the New York Times, then the impact is actually very clear. And you can use other companies who have went through that cycle, or your own company. That is because everybody is clear on the value of traditional media. So like seeing how that is impacting you is visible. However, as Jan said, it's super important to understand your own goals. So if you're trying to get a sign up on your site for whatever it is, for your blog, for your white paper, for a product you sell, if you're in the online business, and then you don't care about engagement in the immediate step. Obviously, if you want to do branding and so on, engagement is all cool. What you care about is that people actually sign up, and then you can use all the different systems which are out there actually to make sure, okay, this person that has a referrer from Twitter. This person actually told me his Facebook page, and I know that he first liked me, in order to figure out what made somebody signing up. Now, that is if you have an end goal, something defined end goal. If your end goal is a little bit more fuzzy than, for example, saying you want to create an awareness, then yes, you can use engagement or clicks. Now, be aware that those metrics are still in a constant flow. There has been just some stuff has been just published, and I'm happy to share this on Twitter later on, that you can see that people are most likely to tweet in the first 20% of the article, meaning they haven't really read what was said, and they're most likely to tweet that. Now, if you're trying to build your brand, then you probably either you have a very strong way of formulating this in the first 20% of the article, or you should not rely on retweeting as metrics. So that example shows you first define your base, and then define what you're measuring against it. And that could be engagements, that could be views. But the more closer you can bind it to the business in terms of, oh, he tweeted it, and he now is a customer, is a member, whatever it is, the better it is.
I suppose moving on from that, Liz, I mean, that could also be the more direct link to in the impact on sales. Now, for many, ROI continues to be the kind of three magic letters in social media marketing. And to go back to you, Liz, I mean, do you feel that traditional ROI measurements and attempts to analyze the direct link between your social media efforts and the impact on sales are somewhat futile and perhaps are somewhat misplaced?
Actually, I love this kind of ROI discussion, because and this discussion is so typical for the whole industry. We only because we have more ways of measuring, it doesn't mean that we have a better way of measuring ROI. So ROI used to be a problem before social media. If you would have if you talk to a PR professional and you talk to a branding expert about ROI, they would surely claim that there is a way to measure it, but they all would say it's very difficult. Now, if you try to talk to a direct marketer, he would say, no problem. I totally know what my ROI is. I make 100 phone calls, 10 return, from those 10 one buys, and that's my ROI. Now, that world has not changed. What has changed is we have different tools out there, creating more metrics. But not every metric means, okay, now I have a metric. I should have an ROI. That's a little bit misleading very often. ROI is still a very complex piece to do. Now, what I said for the old world, direct marketeers had an easy way of calculating an ROI. That still is valid for today. If you, and there are loads of examples out in the internet where people saying, oh, Facebook sales, Twitter sales, and how this works, and why this is so great. Well, the very fact is it only works because you have your return, because they linked it back to a sales rate. Now, if we talk about sales, there are definitely two ways to look at it. One is make sure that I understand the return, and the return can be done in two ways. One is you actually create a need and somebody reacts to it. So you do something, and because of that something, this person buys or whatsoever. This could be on LinkedIn, this could be on Facebook, this could be on Twitter. Now the second possibility is obviously you go out and listen, and you are trying to find people which you then put in a funnel and then convert. Now listening is one step remote from the actual R, but still a very, very good chance that you can make a valuable claim of an ROI. If you even go out further and say, you know what, I want to create awareness for a product, I want to brand a product, then you're so far along that any statistical savvy person will just shake his head and saying, you know what, many other drivers might have resulted in this ROI. It's probably not the right way of measuring it.
Certainly, I mean, and on your side, Jen, I mean, in terms of your experience as well, I mean, do you also feel that these perhaps traditional, perhaps often called in relation to social media performance, simplistic measurements, and really attempting to analyze the link, the direct link with sales and with that bottom line? Again, would you say that these are relatively misplaced and are relatively simplistic?
I don't think these efforts are misplaced, actually. I think it's actually very smart. I think that what brands should do are to look at conducting studies to evaluate the impact of your social activity on your brand metrics, since this is so unique and individual to every brand. And these don't need to be, big dollar, multi-month studies and analyses that go on. You can do everything from very simple A/B testing of different types of content to different types of audiences, and that may only take you a week to accomplish. We also do some shorter and longer term studies to evaluate, is there a difference in our customers' perception of our brand and even their purchase behaviors, whether they've been exposed to certain social content versus unexposed. And that's really meaningful to us because it helps us to better craft our social media communication strategies. And even more so, it's helpful because it helps us to better get at that ROI that is so highly sought after. Intel's in a pretty interesting place when it comes to measuring ROI because for the by and large, we are not selling anything directly to a consumer. So it is a little bit trickier for us to get at a traditional ROI number. However, there's other ways of measuring that that can really tell you whether or not your brand's efforts on social are going in the right direction.
And on that, Jen, I mean, both yourself and Lutz have kind of constantly emphasized the importance of utilizing company-specific metrics and generating an accurate performance measurement. I mean, really, what do you see as some of the vital steps in establishing a more personalized framework and personalized method of measurement?
I think one of the first things that I would do is really kind of take a step back from all of the data that you currently have. Almost set that aside for a minute and think about if I could have any data points that I wanted, what would those be and what would those be telling me? And then go find the data that answers the questions that you need to answer to make the right decisions for your company. I think it's a very common pitfall to fall into where companies rely very heavily on the reports or the metrics or the dashboards that are provided by the social networks themselves or by some of their vendors or by some third-party analytics tools that are out there. And while those are all great sources of data, they're created in a way that is meant to service anyone from a small hotel business in India to a multinational FMCG. And you've really got to figure out what's going to be meaningful data points for your company, and then go find the data that's going to help to answer those questions rather than do it the other way around.
And again, I think that was echoing much of what you were talking about earlier, Lutz, and as you said, do not manipulate it in that regard. And really, on your side, Lutz, I mean, in your experience, what are the most common mistakes that companies have made when trying to create metrics for social media and trying to generate a more personalized framework?
I embarked into the whole area of social measurement a couple of years ago as I started my own company. And we served mainly governments and NGOs. So we served the FIFA, the Olympics, the World Economic Forum, OECD, and stuff like that. And consistently, what I see, people get excited about the metrics. It took me a while to figure it out. It took me actually so long that I had to write a book about it, which is Ask, Measure, Learn. What I see in the world very often happens is not ask first, measure then, and then learn from it. It's more measure, trying to find an ask, and then maybe learn. But if you don't put the question first, then very often you get any answer, and then you take the measurement first, and that's the biggest problem. You say, oh, I have now a number of retweets. Let me try to figure out why this might be important for my business. Well, maybe it's not important for your business. And that's the reason, and maybe you as a business owner have a very dedicated set of requirements which might or might not be a relevant metrics for you to use. And if we come from the finance world, I mean, nobody would actually say, let me look at all the metrics I could have out there in order to figure out whether this makes sense for my P&L. Now, normally you start with your P&L and you're saying, okay, in order to run my P&L, I need certain metrics. So in the finance industry, we get this right. Now, with any new thing upcoming, we start very often with a measurement first. And this is not only a thing of social media. I mean, if you wear a Fitbit or a Lumo belt or one of those things, you most likely do this because you start with a measurement first. And what we will need to bring companies to is that they understand what's my business need and in which medium can I get my business need done. I mean, for certain things, LinkedIn is a very good place. For other things, Facebook or Twitter is a good place, very much depending on your business need. And then focus on what are the best metrics I can use to actually achieve my need.
Fantastic. And we're actually going to move to our third poll now, and it links a little bit to what Jen mentioned earlier in terms of the importance of not only measuring social performance, obviously, but also what you learn from this and how you take this and move forward. So our question is, and it should be coming up on your screen right about now, is to what extent do you feel your company generates actionable insight from its social performance measurement, which is then used to drive future social strategy and your future decision-making regarding your social strategy? So to what extent do you feel your company generates actionable performance insights and then using this to drive future social strategy as well as your decision-making? So we have option 1, very much so, B, to some extent, C, improvement required, and then D, again, significant improvement required. So we have about 5 seconds left to vote. If as many of you could vote as possible, that would be fantastic. And just about 3 seconds left. 2, 1. Fantastic. And once again, you should be able to see the results coming on your screen right about now. And as you say, they're primarily, again, sitting in the bottom two options. So significant improvement required and also improvement required on this. So ensuring that not only we generate an accurate picture of our social performance, but then using this to move forward and heighten and really perfect our social strategy. And coming back to you, Lutz, I mean, what framework or processes would you recommend putting in place to ensure that your social measurement is generating this actionable insight and really, therefore, positively influencing your future decision making?
Okay, yeah, very, very nice. I'm just in the process of publishing a blog post on my site where I'm trying to put a framework for this together because I have heard this question more often. So in essence, there are three things you can do with any kind of social media measurement. It's benchmarking, which is the most common one which everybody uses. So we look at time series, we look at how much is company A doing versus company B. And you know, that's your good old BI world. That's what we know since first grade, since we got our first like assignment, and like somebody says, well, you're better than your neighbor. Benchmark. The second thing which we start to use it, and this is becoming more complex, is filtering. Now, filtering and recommendation, well, it's like if you know LinkedIn, you know that we are all doing recommendation engines. This is what my teams is doing and so on. But we're trying to filter out what's important. So if you look at social media, trying to filter who is, if you're, for example, you're sitting in PR, again, question first, you're sitting in PR and you ask, who is the person I need to address to position a certain point? Then this is your recommendation. Who is the person who I best put in my funnel if you sit in sales? Then this would be a recommendation. And you can use certain metrics from social media to assess this. Very text-heavy analytics very often. And then the third part, what you can do is benchmark. So, sorry, benchmark is the first. The third one is you can do is prediction. So you have benchmark, recommendation, and filter, and the third one is prediction. So prediction is, again, coming, like, let's take an example. You need an ask. The ask is you're sitting in PR. You want to predict whether certain information goes contagious, commonly known as viral. I don't like the word viral, but like contagious, so too many people talk about it. Then there are certain metrics you can monitor in order to predict this. So whatever you do, you have three possibilities to use it: benchmark, recommendation and filter, and prediction.
Fantastic. And moving over to you, Jen, I know you touched on it briefly earlier, but in terms of the framework and processes you have at Intel for really ensuring that you are not only generating this accurate picture, but really learning from what you're seeing and what you're processing to ensure that you are positively influencing your future strategy. What do you have in place to ensure that you are doing so consistently?
Yeah, I thought we've talked about this a little bit earlier on in the webinar, so I thought I might give an example of a particular analysis that we've done and how that's worked in terms of a framework. And it is something that we've done year on year surrounding something that's a big initiative for Intel, which is the Consumer Electronics Show, which some of you might be familiar with, but happens in January each year and is a pretty big deal for those of us in the tech industry. So, you know, in following on kind of some of the best practices that Lutz was outlining a minute ago, with an event such as CES, we are starting to plan about 5 to 6 months in advance for what we're going to measure and how we're going to measure it. And so we're first thinking about the audience for the analysis, and in the case of a large initiative such as CES, oftentimes where our CEO is keynoting, and it's a very big event for us. It's the very highest level of executives at our company. So we have, you know, top leadership at the company that are interested in the analysis that we're performing. So that dictates a lot of how that analysis is set up in terms of it being quite high level and very much tied to the business goals. We think about what are the things that are important for us to be measuring at an event like CES, and the questions that we need to answer. And so some of those questions for us are, what was our share of voice at the event? What was the sentiment of the conversations that was happening? Were our messages being picked up and our hashtags being picked up, or was it really just Intel that was talking about our messages, or were there other influencers and other members of our communities that were engaging in that conversation with us? And then as some of the secondary measurements, we're also looking at whether or not an event like that is generating fan and follower growth from our pages. And we also look at attrition. Sometimes if you're not careful at an event and you kind of get too internally focused, you can actually cause unfollows and unlikes to happen if you're a little bit too eager to talk about the event itself. So we've defined some of those measurements as being important for us at that event. And then we're thinking about frequency and how the analysis is going to be delivered. And for an event like CES, it's immediate. We're measuring the analytics actually at the event itself. So we have a real-time dashboard that we use on an ongoing basis that's set up in a suite at the booth, and we're constantly measuring. And then we also do a formal analysis and report out to company leadership just a couple days after the event. So it's a constant measurement and a very rapid wrap-up of the information following. So that's just kind of one example of how we would structure it for a very specific activity, and something that's very important for many different levels of the company.
That's perfect, and I mean one of the key questions coming through quite regularly on the question board, Jen, was, you know, are there any specifics that you can provide about, with regards to metrics according to various targets such as branding, marketing, awareness, and also, you know, what tools and platforms that you use to monitor much of your activity?
Sure. So the tools one I can answer first. The tools are predominantly dashboards that we have created internally, and many with the help of a couple of key agency partners that support us. But they're really specifically crafted for what Intel really cares about. So the real-time dashboard that I mentioned that we use at an event like CES is something that we have created. We created it about 4 years ago, and it's undergone many iterations since then. But it's kind of a terminal type of a setting that you might envision at, you know, the New York Stock Exchange or something, and it's a constant measurement. Some of the key measurements that we measure on there are share of voice overall, so how much of the conversation that's related to that particular event are we capturing. Oftentimes we'll measure share of voice around different specific technology topics that are of great interest to us. So if we're really, you know, starting to talk about tablets, for example, we'll measure the conversation that's happening around that. We are measuring what influencers are saying, so we're looking at who are the most important influencers at that event and what types of things they're saying and what brands they're tweeting about and who they're talking about. And then we're measuring the overall growth of our fans and followers and how that's really being impacted. We're also, separate to that dashboard, but something else that we're measuring very closely that we haven't really touched on is the media impact. So of course, you know, applying some media budget to your social media activities is pretty critical in today's environment. And so we're very closely analyzing every penny that we're spending to understand how we can maximize efficiencies of our media spend. So how can we drive those cost per engagements down and the cost per acquisitions down, and how can we drive the engagement rates up? And we're looking at both the financial analysis of that as well as tying it back to the content. So really understanding how many hashtags are optimal, what's the copy length that's optimal, what type of media is optimal in terms of maximizing our media spend.
Fantastic. And one of the other key questions, which again is come up time and time again, and it's fantastic, the amount of questions really coming through on the question box on the left-hand side. And so I'll go to you first. Is really how you see social media metrics evolving in the future. You know, for example, over the next 5 years, in terms of what is currently being measured and what you hope to see being measured. I mean, is there a lot of change on the horizon for you, and how is that going to manifest itself?
Yes, I assume there will be way more changes coming. So early on, I mentioned the very fact that engagement, which used to be a little bit the holy grail. People said, oh, I need engagement, I need engagement. It first used to be mentions, okay? Then we realized that a lot of traffic out there is actually bots. And like I explain in the book how easy and stunningly easy it is for anybody, even without technical knowledge, to set up a bot. So if you want to create a high traffic thing on social media, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, it's very easy. So the industry realized that we moved away from mentions, share of voice in a big time. So we said, like, okay, it's engagement. Now, new research shows actually engagement doesn't mean impact. Engaged article drives traffic to the site, but doesn't mean that people actually read it. That's bad news for many. So now the industry is looking now for the new next metrics to look for. And I think I don't see an end coming very soon. So we will see new metrics coming up. We will see new ways of engaging with this technology coming up. And the best way everybody can be equipped is actually by looking at all the metrics available and mapping it to the actual goal. You know, the ask. You have the ask first, and you map it to the goal, the measurement. And for anybody who is interested in, and actually, like, I put a framework together, and you can. This is it's a small booklet which I put up, which is actually on my website. If you go to lutzfinger.com/resources, you find their workbook on how to score different measurements. So whenever any time a new measurement comes up, which will happen very often in the future as well, you kind of score it according to this framework, and then you know, is it relevant measurement for me or not? And by the way, if you go to any webinar and somebody tells you that's not a relevant measurement, it depends. It always depends. Like we at LinkedIn use certain things which I would not recommend anybody else to use because it's fitting our business. It doesn't fit anybody else's businesses, and so on.
And exactly, and that comes all the way back to our initial point of the importance of that clarity at the earliest stage. And you know, the same question over to you, Jen. Really, to put your prediction hat on, you know, how do you see social media metrics evolving? I mean, I was going to say over the next 5 years. I mean, that really is quite a testing question. But at least in the relatively near future, how do you see this changing in terms of what is being currently measured and what will be measured in the future?
Yes, I definitely see change coming, and I would definitely say that there will be many iterations within the next even year to 2 years, much beyond 5 years. Something that I'm especially interested in right now is more granular content targeting and what that means and what kind of data that actually gives us access to. In the past, companies have measured social media and social analytics very holistically. So looking at things from an overall sentiment point of view, or very much in aggregate. And I think some of the opportunities that are presenting themselves a little bit now and certainly leading into the future are going to be much, much more granular. So looking at different slices of audiences and looking what's working with very different niche pieces of the audience and evaluating those metrics against very targeted groups of fans or followers, and then following those small groups of audiences, following their behavior over time to understand the longer-term impact of your social media activities against their longer-term behavior.
And another great answer, Jen, and that's fantastic. And really what has been nice about today's discussion is the differing answers and perspectives from both our speakers as well as the listeners who've been getting involved through the question box and also on Twitter. Unfortunately, given the time we now have to end today's webinar, and apologies if I was unable to get around to your question. We actually went through quite a few, which is always fantastic. We really have had some great engagement and interaction with today's discussion, with many questions flying in through both means. If you'd like to hear more from both Lutz and Jennifer, as mentioned at the start, they will be speaking alongside 30 other senior leading executives in the social space at the Corporate Social Media Summit in San Francisco on the 15th and 16th of September. Certainly do check out the full speaker lineup and all the crucial and interesting social media topics being discussed at the summit by downloading the summit brochure. As you can see, all the relevant links are displayed at the bottom of your screen. Now, before everyone leaves to get their first or indeed last coffee of the day, depending on where you are in the world, we will be sending out the recordings of this webinar next week, so no need to worry if you missed any parts of today's discussion. And I'd also like to say a huge thank you to our speakers for today, both Lutz and Jennifer, for your fantastic insight and hopefully some takeaway goodies as well. I know we've got a couple of requests on Twitter. Hopefully we can get those in. As I say, the discussion has been hugely valuable and enjoyable, so thank you again for that on both our speakers. And finally, of course, thank you to you, the audience, for joining. And the only thing left to say is I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.